Good evening. I'm Derek Fildebrandt, publisher of the Western Standard. You're watching The Pipeline today on September 14th, 2022. And boy, it has been a beautiful day. We've got a great show today. Let me introduce my co-belligerents, Western Standard opinion editor, Nigel Hannaford. How are you?
I'm great. How's everybody? In the Fildebrandt house?
It's good. Oktoberfest is coming. I'm stockpiling beer, polishing lederhosen.
Glad to hear that.
Yeah.
We'll help you.
You're not a big fan of leather pants, Corey?
I just didn't like thinking of polishing your lederhosen.
I don't actually polish lederhosen. Actually, the way you do it is when I was in Munich for Oktoberfest, there was this old guy I was drinking beer with. He had these beat up old lederhosen, and I said, "Wow, they've taken a lot. You know, mine are getting kind of worn out too, and I can't find a place with dry clean." He says, "You never dry clean the lederhosen. You take the oil on your hands from like chicken or sausages or something. You take the oil and you rub it through the lederhosen. It gives it good protection." I'm doing more of a Russian accent, I guess it sounds like. But yeah, that's how you polish it. Is you just take grease from food and rub it into it, and it protects it. My greasy leather pants.
That's an amazing heritage you're preserving.
It's our proudest moment. Okay, well, we've got an interesting story today. Set of discussion topics today. Poilievre's landslide win, absolutely killing it. Crushing, annihilating, I don't know how many adjectives I can use to describe Poilievre's win. We're going to talk about what the hell happened, reality, expectation versus reality. Also, the Western Standard has commissioned Main Street Poll to conduct a series of scientific polls across Alberta, some very interesting data. We have a real, we did on a number of topics, a real focus on the UCP leadership race, but a few other things as well. Danielle Smith leading the race, unsurprisingly, but we've got a breakdown of where that's at and what it could mean for the selection of Alberta's next UCP leader and premier. Also, we polled Albertans of where they stand on the Sovereignty Act. In particular, how does it break down within the United Conservative Party? Very interesting numbers coming up. The numbers certainly don't support a lot of the strategies that are being pursued by at least some of the camps. Also polling... who do Albertans trust more, mainstream media or independent and alternative media sources? Well, I know what you guys trust more. Of course, you should watch the CBC, the schmucks. Yeah, no, I'm just joking. We've done some polling on what kind of media Albertans like to go to. Before we get into it, though, we got to thank my favorite sponsor. Oh, they're just wonderful. The Canadian Shooting Sports Association. I've been a member of the CSSA for well over a decade because I trust them as Canada's leading gun rights organization, defending our right to buy and use firearms safely and legally in Canada against the federal government's constant attempts to take those rights away. Without the CSSA, they would have taken our guns long ago. And yes, they try, but whatever rights we have got left are thanks to groups like the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. If you're not yet a member of the CSSA, go join right now. Go to cssa-cila.org. And yes, I asked Corey before the show started so I could write it down. That's the first time I got it right, isn't it, Corey?
It's a rare occasion, yeah.
Rare occasion.
And I always just remind everybody, just kind of Google it anyways. You'll find it pretty fast.
Yeah.
It's easier.
If my CSSA friends are watching, please change the URL. It's terrible. But just Google the damn thing. Google it. Okay, so let's jump right into this, guys. Crushing, massive, destroying. I don't know how many more adjectives we can use to describe this. Anything. I know we had our own predictions down. Corey actually, just for those of you who didn't watch our live broadcast Saturday, Corey actually won the office pool on it. He was entitled to quite a few 6-packs of beer. He very generously declined a lot of good, expensive beer. I could have used it. Oktoberfest coming. I could have really used that beer. I did not win. Corey edged me out for the top spot. Instead, he took his prize in the form of a pizza party for all the staff in the Calgary headquarters. Very nice.
Bloated now, thanks to it.
Yeah. So the win was not really unexpected. It was actually even higher than both our predictions. It was about 68% in points, 70% in terms of popular vote. So let's not talk about expectations versus reality. Actually, we all expected this to be huge, maybe a little bit bigger than some of us were thinking. But I want your thoughts. And what does this mean for the Conservative Party? Poilievre has won with the biggest mandate of any leader in the history of that party, obviously more than Scheer and O'Toole, but even more than Stephen Harper did, both in terms of points percentage and in terms of number of votes and popular vote percentage. What do you think this means for Poilievre coming in as the new leader?
Nothing bad, that's for sure. I mean, one of the grim predictions leveled against Poilievre from the beginning was, well, he'll do well in Alberta, but he won't do so well back east. Well, what happened? Out of 338 riding associations, he carried 330 of them. So that means that at least 70 of them in Quebec voted for
everything but 6 in Quebec and 2 in Ontario.
2 in Ontario. So first of all, there's something going on across the country. I think it's particularly strong here in Alberta. But if you look at the way people are engaging with politics at the moment, a number of people, for example, who wanted to go to Red Deer last year for the leadership, or in fact it was March of this year, for the leadership review. I mean, normally those events get about 1,000, 1,200 people. There were darn near 20,000 people who wanted to go. Mm-hmm. Like, wanting to go to a leadership review like that means paying $100 and driving halfway across the province to get there, because whether you're starting from Calgary or Edmonton, Red Deer's in the middle. So there was a tremendous commitment to making a statement, whether it was for the Premier or against. A lot of people wanted to do that. You look at the turnout that you get in some of the constituency association meetings now to put in the new board that's going to go in. It was 450, I think, came out to Leela Here's board meeting.
Local AGM. I've never heard of a local AGM with anything approaching that. 100 would be a lot.
Yeah, 50, 60 is kind of normal. So something was obviously going on there. Something was obviously going on that thousands of truckers converged on Ottawa, and thousands more people joined them either on the streets or in echo events around the country. So something has happened in this country that is causing people who normally wouldn't even write a letter to the editor to get on their bike, get in their truck, get on the plane, go somewhere and do something and make a statement. Now, that is the wave of unrest that I think has helped Pierre Poilievre move into such a commanding position. Like right now, if there was an election tomorrow, that particular campaign is already on a war footing. I would be surprised if Mr. Trudeau would even want to dare risk it. He's surfing it.
Mm-hmm. Cory, I think Nigel's essentially arguing that he's captured lightning in a bottle. There is this big tsunami coming right now, and you could see Poilievre on his surfboard wearing a nice Hawaiian shirt, riding it to a crushing victory. But the magnitude of his victory, it's not these little piecemeal down ballot things. Andrew Scheer, I think, took 13 ballots to win, and he didn't win a single one of them until the very last one. And there were even questions about that last ballot. And then you have O'Toole. I think it took a good number of ballots for him to win, and he needed the clear support of social conservative kingmakers to get there before he threw them overboard. He threw Leslie Lewis overboard. He threw Derek Sloan overboard. Poilievre doesn't seem to owe anyone anything here. It's his party. What do you think that means for the ability of Poilievre to maybe remake the Conservative Party in his mold?
Well, I don't know if he's looking to remake things, but the bottom line is he's got the mandate. He's got the authority. He can move. I mean, nobody can question where he's going to go right now. He just got 68% in a hard, fought race within that party. And the closest was Charest at 16. So it's not like there was even a close second contender. So it gives him a lot of leeway to stay on message. People can't keep saying to him, you have to tone it down now. You have to lighten up. I mean, there's a degree of looking at the federal picture now, but he's in charge. I mean, he's been proven right on where he's gone and the way he's done it. And I imagine he's going to continue to. And it's not, it's as Nigel says, people are looking for change. They're getting off their butts and they're doing something. And, it's not like he had pretty hair and was of a rock star quality. He's a bit of a geeky looking guy,
He's Millhouse for PM.
But it's the messaging people came onto, and that's a stronger base of support than somebody looking for, something fluffy. He could do some great things here.
So we talked about this on Saturday evening when he gave his acceptance speech, which I think he was pretty confident he was going to be allowed to give, about potential pivot. He definitely didn't throw any of his policies and signature ideas off, but there were some things that he talked about regularly, his biggest applause lines during campaign events, that were not in that speech. You didn't hear talk about digital currencies like Bitcoin. You didn't hear talk about defunding the CBC and ending media subsidies. Still talked about in general about freedom and things like that. A lot of the punditry has speculated: is he going to pivot? Is he going to pivot? Do you think this was a pivot of any kind? And if so, was it a pivot of substance or just rhetoric? What do you think?
Maybe a pivot of rhetoric. I mean, first of all, the regular mainstream media, the state-supported media, as we refer to them, are not going to give this man a break in any sense. So if he does well, he could have done better. If he says this, he could have said that. So the fact that he did not make further reference to defunding the CBC does not mean the idea has gone away. It just means it'll come back another day when the time is right. Didn't talk about, I don't think you mentioned firing the governor of the Bank of Canada either.
No.
But, do you think that, I don't think that matter is at rest. Whether the governor stays or the governor goes, it's the policy that has to change. And that is every indication that Mr. Poilievre means to cut back on the inflationary spending that has brought about the situation we're all struggling with now at the gas pumps and the grocery stores. So I don't see a pivot there.
So, Cory, we're not going to know if he actually jettisons any of the. I mean, it's not uncommon for a political leader a conservative leader to run on the right in the leadership, pivot to the center for the general, or often liberals and Democrats run on the hard left in the leadership and they come to the center afterwards. We're not going to know until we really see the platform. If we don't see anything about the CBC in there, or the governor of the Bank of Canada, well, then we'll know for sure.
So we're an election platform point.
Yeah, we're not going to know until we see that, for sure.
Right now, I mean, it's as Nigel said with the CBC, though, it does resonate with some people, but you're keeping your powder dry. I mean, maybe the right opportunity comes. We've got a while to the next election, so suddenly some pictures get leaked of Rosie Barton's Justin Trudeau hope chest. Well, that's going to bring everybody up and show just how slanted they are at the CBC. And that's a good time to take another shot and fire at him. But there's no sense going into shooting every barrel you got just after you won. Mm-hmm. The economy is the big thing, and he's really focusing on that right now. And I suspect he's going to come back to the others if they rise in the interest of Canadians.
The other thing is, if and when an election comes around, you're not going to go out there. You publish a full policy book, but you're not going to campaign on 100 things. You're going to do like Stephen Harper did, I would guess, in the 2006 election. Pick out 5 things that actually resonate and dribble them out one a week through the election campaign.
Well, when Harper did that, it was 5 big items, but they still had a full platform costed out.
Yes, they did.
It's expected you're going to have a full platform, but Harper had his 5 big things, and I remember, I was barely in university, or no, was I? I don't even know if I was in university. Yeah, I think I was in university or high school. I was in high school. That's what it is, and. Every Canadian could say what those 5 things were. They didn't know the rest of the platform, but those 5 things were it, and everyone got it. So you'll probably see something like that. I want to talk about the runner-up, Leslyn Lewis. Now, I'm not positive, but her campaign, I think, has claimed she actually got more votes this time than last time. But her impact on the race was undeniably smaller. Last time, the time O'Toole was elected, she was probably the only real, arguably Derek Sloan, but her and Derek Sloan were the only actual real conservatives in that race. Aaron O'Toole, people who were cheering for him, he was running for True Blue. And I said, guys, he's clearly lying to you. He's clearly full of it. But Lewis was the most genuine of those candidates. She did very strongly. She arguably won the popular vote and could have won except for the point system. But she was pretty far back this time. But but she was closer to Jean Charest in points than Charest was to Poilievre. Much, much closer. In fact, in popular vote, she was only a hair behind Charest. In popular vote, she was almost a second place candidate. What's next for her? She had a really strong showing in the time O'Toole won, but O'Toole put her straight to the backbenches. Didn't care that she represented a more conservative wing of the party. Was angry at her that she was or that she refused to disclose her vaccination status. We'll start with you, Cory, maybe. what do you think the future holds for her? Where's Leslyn Lewis going to go when the dust settles here?
I think Poilievre will give her a good critic's portfolio and keep her front and center. I don't think he's going to make the same error as O'Toole. I mean, he's got a good unified party. Let's keep it. Sure, she only came in at around 10% this time around, but that's a significant number. When you're looking at 600 and some thousand members, as you said, that number of votes still grew, and these are motivated voters. I mean, the ones she represents are the door knockers. They're the donors. They're that's part of why people always wonder why traditional conservatives or social conservatives tend to punch above their weight. Well, it's because their base gets out and helps. They're much more potent in a party than others. So I think Poilievre's wise enough to take that seriously. Respect her, as we talked about before, put her somewhere, and probably, I would imagine, if he forms a government, some sort of cabinet portfolio. He's going to keep her prominent, maybe not right next to him all the time, but she's going to be well kept in.
Same to you, Nigel. What do you think happens with Lewis?
Well, I think Cory has nailed it. I mean, I noticed she didn't make the first cut when he announced his leadership team. She was not one of the 8, but she absolutely represents an important constituency. And Cory was making a reference to that they work hard, they turn out, they pound the signs into the hard packed earth and 20 below. They also write the checks.
Mm-hmm.
They strongly believe in putting their money where their mouth is. If he were to lose the respect of that component, it would cost them literally money.
And she wasn't a part of that leadership team, but the way caucus works, there's some of that leadership team who are genuinely in positions of leadership, like House Leader, which is Andrew Scheer, and the Whip. Some of the positions, like caucus chair and things like that, are actually a bit more junior, because then you've got your critic portfolios. Generally, the finance critic job, which Poilievre had before, a job I used to have as well provincially, that's considered a very high-level one. So, you'd rather be finance critic probably and not be on the leadership team in most cases. You're going to get airtime there. The question is he going to be as scared of his finance critic as O'Toole was of his finance critic? Well, I suspect not.
I suspect that there is enough people who think the same way that it will not be an issue of choice. Just, who's absolutely.
Okay, so we're going to bring it back here closer to home here. The Western Standard commissioned Main Street Research to do a scientific poll. This is not like a website poll. The Western Standard, we put up a poll. We're asking readers what they think. But it's kind of self-selecting. Those are Western Standard readers. This is not self-selecting. This is demographically weighted across Alberta. It gets a pretty good sense of where Albertans are at. So we paid Main Street to do this, ask them a number of questions. One of the ones we asked was, of course, how people intend to vote in the next election. The UCP in this has pulled ahead. The UCP has been languishing in the polls. It's not that long after they were elected, and it continued to go down and down and down. Often at the expense of the to the benefit of the Wild Rose. In this, the Wild Rose had really fallen back down to earth at 5%. 5% has still got a heartbeat of something, but it's much lower than the 14% they were getting this time last year, right before Kenny was kind of showed the door by his party's members in the leadership review. But among those who say that they're voting UCP, the poll had Danielle Smith at 44%. Second place at less than half of that was Brian Jean at 20%. And then in a statistical tie, but technically a point behind him, was Travis Taves, 19%. And then after that, you had somewhere in the neighborhood of 5% for
3-2.
Rebecca Schultz, roughly another 5 or so for Todd Lowen, and then nil for the last two. What's your think of this number? Do you think this is reflecting what you're seeing?
Well, first of all, that huge support for Danielle Smith is the same. It's the same kind of spirit that drives it as this huge support for Poilievre. People are looking for change, and they find somebody who articulates that need to change very clearly, very definitely knows what they think, and is good at putting it across. They're not playing around at the edges. But what I find interesting about that particular race is that Smith raised more than $1 million, something like $1,040,000, and she got that from something like 4,500 people.
Yeah.
And she has 44% of the party's support.
So it was a large number of small donations.
A large number of small donations Mr. Taves also raised over $1 million, not quite as much as
They're about tied, yeah.
about tied, but his support is down there at 19%. So what does that tell you? It suggests to me that there's a smaller number of larger donations. So who is backing?
Taves' campaign, our reporter in Edmonton, Arthur Green, asked the Taves campaign. He gave the Western Standard the amount that the Taves campaign has raised, but they refused to disclose the number of donors, which was very strange. One could surmise that probably means it's a smaller number of large donations. Strangely, though, the Jean campaign refused to say anything. They refused to say how much has been raised, let alone from how many people. But yeah, it's an interesting point. You've got both campaigns raising pretty much the same amount of money, but one campaign with more than twice the support of the other.
So what I'm thinking, there are some people who are deeply invested in Alberta politics, who really want Mr. Taves to win, and they're digging deep in their pockets, which is their right. And but it's interesting that Smith's appeal seems to be wider, much wider.
Corey, so back to the polling numbers. 40. We've got all of the other candidates whose name is not Danielle Smith, save Todd Loewen, have been very clear. It's anybody but Danielle. They had their, as Linda Slobodian put it, their Mean Girls press conference, getting together saying Sovereignty Act is terrible. It's the worst thing ever. Danielle must be stopped. Vote for anyone but her. Rank your ballot all the way with everyone whose name is not Danielle Smith. She's sitting at 44 here. And that's, I think, lining up with most other polls. It's got her just shy of winning on a first ballot. But I think the smart money here is that she's not going to grow as much on subsequent ballots as probably Travis Taves and possibly Brian Jean will. How much risk is she in of Alberta conservative frontrunner syndrome here, where she has a strong first ballot but can't grow her way to a win on the subsequent ballots?
I don't think it's that high a risk. If you look at the numbers, even if these held, and of course, we polled with people who say they would vote UCP, but it's not necessarily members, so that's a different category altogether.
Yeah.
And a 44%, and then it was 7, I believe, for Loewen. And I would almost think when Loewen drops off, if those numbers held, almost all of those 7% would go towards Smith. Her bar to reach in that creep, and we know that she might only get a small percentage of the second votes for the other candidates when they drop off, but it would be enough by that point to push her over the edge. But I think realistically among members, I mean, it's indicative as well when you look at the way those fundraising numbers matched out. She's doing good traditional ground organization. She's selling a lot of membership. She's getting people on the ground. She's galvanizing them. I mean, you could get a millionaire to give $100,000 to a campaign, but his vote's still only one vote when it comes to the membership voting.
Technically, that would be illegal.
Well, you know what I'm
I
saying.
take your point. There's ways.
There's ways. So, she's doing it the traditional, get them out there. And I suspect when you're looking at percentages of actual members sold plus members that are engaged ones that are going to get out and vote, I still think she's going to win it comfortably on the first ballot.
You think she's going to get first ballot?
I do.
Have you got that on the bet?
I don't know. Might have changed by this point.
You got to get on the board.
Yeah. Oh, I'm up there. I just I haven't looked at it. And,
well, it's going to cost you another $6-pack to update your. If you want to get on
again,
again,
get that back out of me one way or another.
I'm gonna get paid back here. If you can add another one, but it costs you another $6-pack. It's essentially you're placing a second bet.
I don't even remember what I did.
You're going double or nothing
the first time, so I'll have a look. But at this point,
you're saying first ballot.
I think she's going to win at first ballot. I'll throw my number out right now at 55.
Okay. Have you got a guess?
I would actually say very much the same as Corey, just to make it more fun. I'll say 60%, but
60
first ballot.
Okay.
Well, think about where you take all the votes that aren't already committed to Taves and Jean. They've got to go somewhere.
Yeah, but other than Loewen, they're all strongly anti-Smith.
And Taves is status quo support. Like he's been selling to people who are saying, I'm okay with things as they are. Those are the hardest ones to get off their butt, fill out that thing, seal the envelope, and put it in the mail.
I agree.
It's the angry one who votes.
But I think the reason she has semi-captured lightning in a bottle here, but I think a little less so than Poilievre. And the reason for that is that federally, the Liberals are in power. Right now, the Conservatives are in power. And so you have a large segment of the UCP, the more kind of establishment, PC Tory side, that says, well, things can't be that bad. We're in power, so they're not as angry. For them, the last few years have been, on balance, probably fine. Mistakes were made, but on balance, they're fine. I think she's captured the bigger part of the party, but I think because it's not like federally, we're Trudeau's in power. So I'd be surprised if she captures that much of a thundering win. But let's go to the one way maybe she can. So what we're going to talk now about is another part of the poll we did, which is the on the Sovereignty Act. So I don't have the exact numbers. Overall, a plurality of Albertans were opposed to it. Now, we asked the question differently than other media have. Other media and pollsters went out and they said, do you support the Freedom Convoy, which was a movement that went to Ottawa to blockade borders, occupy the city, and end public health measures? Well, that's pretty leading. I didn't want to lead it in the other way and say, did you support the Freedom Convoy, which went to overturn the tyrannical government in Ottawa, which has been oppressing us? That would have been leading as well, even though it might be kind of my view. We just asked simply, do you support the proposed Alberta Sovereignty Act? Simple. So there was a plurality, not a majority, but a plurality of Albertans were opposed, but a very, very strong minority were supportive. And then roughly 25% didn't know or didn't have an opinion. But I asked had the pollster ask that question for a different reason. I want to know how UCP voters feel about that. So then you segment, that first question we had, how are you going to vote? And you match it up, take the UCP people, and then ask for their answers on the Sovereignty Act. And that was an interesting number. 67% of likely UCP voters in Alberta say that they support the Sovereignty Act. Second place was not opposition to the Sovereignty Act. Second place, by far, was about 25% who said that they don't know or don't have an opinion. Among UCP voters, the opposition to it was about, correct me if I'm wrong, we have the numbers on the site, but it was about only 17% of UCP voters oppose the Sovereignty Act. So let's talk about what this means just for raw politics. I don't know about you, Nigel, but I would like to be on the side with 67%, not 17%. Right now, you've got one big candidate and one small candidate, Smith and Lowen, on the 67% side. And then you've got all 5 other candidates, 2 of which are big, sharing 17%. If you're advising Travis Taves or Brian Jean, you look at these numbers, what do you advise them to do?
Change the channel. Don't talk about the Sovereignty Act if you can get away with it. No,
They've tried, they can't. This has become a referendum on it. It's too late.
Smith has obviously laid out the terms of this thing, but they're on the wrong side of the people who are going to make the decision. It's as simple as that. If you've got 10 people in the room and 6 of them want one thing, 2 of them don't know, and 2 of them will want completely different, it's the 6th that's going to make the decision. And those are roughly the percentages that you're talking about here. And there's not really an awful lot that the 2 can do about it. I mean, they can.
It's actually like 6-3-1 almost.
Well,
They're in third place beyond don't know.
Yeah. So they're not in a good spot. If that's if it's a referendum on the Sovereignty Act, there's the result.
So Cory, I'm going to ask you this from a different perspective. You look at this and you're on the Smith campaign. This would tell me that the Sovereignty Act is more popular than Danielle Smith. Danielle Smith is actually below where she should be. If this is a referendum on the Sovereignty Act, she's underperforming. Sovereignty Act's at 67 among UCP voters. She's at 44. If I was her, if I'm advising her, I'm telling her, double down on it. Talk Sovereignty Act all day, every day. What would you advise her?
I don't know if I'd go with that. Like, it's at this point, if you're starting to feel pretty confident you're going to pull this off, because that's going to be the harder sell if and when she does win the race.
She probably wants a first ballot win, though.
Well,
if the 44 turns out to be true, that's not a first ballot. It's still at least up in the air.
Yeah, I think broadening some of her policy, I think with the tactics she did recently, now she's gone into healthcare. And she's, that's a big issue with a lot of people. And when you've got some of that 67%, they might have still been supporting one of the other candidates because then, well, I don't know where she stands in healthcare. I like the Sovereignty Act, but I don't know where she is there. Well, she's now stepped in that. I mean, there's a risk because her health stance could drop people off of her. So, when you start changing, you start losing some of your base as quickly as you gain it. So you better watch which battles you take. But I don't know about hammering further on the Sovereignty Act. I mean, you don't back down from it by any means, but I think at this phase,
Smith is less popular among UCP voters than the Sovereignty Act. I mean, so on the other side, just politically, I mean, Taves and Jean might genuinely believe that the Sovereignty Act's a bad idea. But I mean, I've never met a politician who's above flip-flopping when it makes good sense to. And for me, if I'm looking at them, it looks like this is a time to flip-flop.
Well, she can twist the knife a little more. She has been trying to be very conciliatory and nice. The reality is, at least when you're looking at Taves, look, you guys did nothing for 3 years. That's why your leader got kicked out on his butt. I'm proposing to do something. That's what's drawing people. You guys should get on board with this, even, if you're going to twist that knife a little more. But I mean, I think everybody's already well aware that that's her act as far as that goes. If that's why they're going to support her, then they will. So I just don't know if doubling down is going to give her much benefit at this point.
Yeah, well,
I don't know. I'll put it to you. Smith, 44, is definitely leading the pack by a wide margin, but she is still well behind support for the act that she's associated with. If you were advising her, would you tell her you need to do more? You need to continue to bust away in support of the Sovereignty Act, or are you trying to broaden appeal? Or are you just trying to max out Sovereignty Act support?
so people like the Sovereignty Act, the people who are going to make this decision, some of them are still unsure about Danielle Smith because of the floor crossing. That is probably a big part of the difference between the 44% that she enjoys and the 67% that supports
a big
the act.
albatross. She's
So
still,
how does she cross that? There's only one way to do it, and that's out there doing what she's doing, out there talking to people. She is very persuasive. When you meet her, you want to believe her. And so the more people she meets, the more hands she shakes, the more she puts it out there, the better her chances of and reaching out to the low-end supporters as well.
The single biggest cause leads me to think that she's going to win this is not that she is at 44%. It's that the keystone policy that this has become a referendum on, the Sovereignty Act, is at 67%. And that other than Todd Loewen, all of the others have not just said that they're against it, they have cried chicken little about it. They're calling this apocalyptic. And now you got to be careful with polling on issues, though, because not every issue is weighted the same to every voter. Every voter says healthcare is important, but not every voter makes their decision based on healthcare. 67% say they support the Sovereignty Act. That doesn't mean that 67% of the UCP voters are going to make their decision based on the Sovereignty Act either, because people have different priorities.
You are correct. That is the theory. But you said it yourself just now. Sovereignty Act has become the referendum. This election is a referendum on the Sovereignty Act. That's the trigger issue this time. I think your analysis is correct.
Speaking of a referendum, we had a little one in this poll on how Albertans feel about the media. Now, I don't want to toot our own horn too much, but I got to do it a bit. I don't have, I should have written down the details of the numbers here, but the numbers were great. So this is Albertans at large, not just UCP voters. This is Albertans at large with a demographically weighted proper poll. And there was a strong plurality, I think in the 40s, around 42% of Albertans. Honestly, more than I thought. We asked Albertans, or a pollster asked Albertans, which source of news do you trust more? Independent and alternative sources, or mainstream sources of news? And it was I think a win of about 10% for independent and alternative media, which is incredible. I know we're at strong risk of tooting our own horn here too much, but whatever. Let's take a victory lap. But it's not just the Western Standard. There are other independent media here, some on the left, mostly not on the left, but there are some. Cory, go to you first. What do you think would be behind that? Why would, why are at least Albertans, we didn't ask Canadians at large, but we asked Albertans, Why do you think Albertans would be leaning so strongly towards independent media outlets and away from the mainstream?
I think a lot of it still hangs over from the truckers' convoy. I mean, the media, the legacy media in Canada embarrassed itself with its coverage of that, the way they portrayed things, they spun things, they fabricated some things even. I mean, the amount of retractions that Mother Corp had to put out during the convoy was an embarrassment in itself, and Albertans haven't forgotten that. And a lot of that, too, is, again, we've seen that definitely a fawning towards Justin Trudeau and Justin Trudeau's hostility towards Alberta. So you're getting quite a recipe for people to say, I've had it with that establishment media and I'm looking for alternatives. So I think it's happening across the country, but probably more so than other areas than in Alberta. And then some of it, I like to think, just pat our own backs, we're doing a good job. We've been putting stuff out there. It's been some years of Dave with some solid news copy and some great columnists and reporters and people realizing we can go to other sources.
You can pat yourself on the back. We have good opinion from you too.
But they're finding out that these alternatives are more than blogs. They are real news alternatives, and they're coming out to them.
I think it also really went downhill for mainstream media during the last 2 years with the COVID coverage.
Yeah,
because it was so obvious that they were, in their own minds, they were good corporate citizens doing a public service by taking whatever the government said and putting it out there with a bullhorn and making sure people did the right thing. And often it wasn't the right thing. And often they found themselves saying one thing here and something else completely different there. And people eventually say, well, I don't know whether I believe any of them anymore. Yeah. And that their behavior during COVID really hurt them.
I would take it from both of you. I think those 2 years were absolutely devastating to it. Where in their minds, they were being good corporate citizens, but they stopped seeing themselves as watchdogs of the powerful and started seeing themselves as the bullhorn of the public good. And they have a different view than perhaps some of we do on what is public good. And I think their coverage of the Freedom Convoy in Ottawa, that was just that was the piece de resistance. That was just kind of the accumulation of it where you've just got some truckers with bouncy castles and hot tubs, and they're saying, well, good God, it's like London in the Blitz. We're under siege from the Nazis, and we're facing imminent invasion at any time. Democracy is going to be overthrown. And I think a lot of people saw through that. I would suspect if we conducted this poll in other provinces, particularly in the East, you'd probably see mainstream with an edge over the independent and alternative sides. I think you'd still see a lot of support for independent and alternative, but I think you'd see less so because there's less independent and alternative media there. Alberta is we're the laboratory of it in Canada. The influence of independent media, I think, in Alberta is much greater than elsewhere. I mean, that's we're the Western Standard. We're across all 4 Western provinces, but it's no secret.
Careful, Derek, they're listening.
We're broadcasting, but it's no secret that we're most read in Alberta over other provinces. We've got good readerships in the other 3 Western, but definitely biggest in Alberta. And you've also got significant numbers of people here who are going to listen to other non-government sources of media, left and right. I think it's just bigger here, so there's more experience with it. But yes, the last 2 years, then finished off with the Freedom Convoy, but this has been coming for a long time. It's been coming for a long time. Trust going down in the mainstream media. What was more interesting to me was trust in the independent and alternative media. Distrust in the mainstream media has been building for some time, but trust in the alternatives to it. That was heartening that 40-odd% of Albertans they put their trust in organizations like us and other independents. Okay, well, that's enough tooting of our own horn for a day. Like the Freedom Convoy. Boop, boop. All right, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining. If you are not yet a member of the Western Standard, shame on you. Shame. Hang your head in shame. But open your computer right now if it's not already open. Go to westernstandard.news and click on membership. It's only $10 a month or $100 a year, and that'll give you unlimited access to all Western Standard content, and you'll be supporting independent, bailout-free Western media. Apparently, your neighbors trust us. So if you trust us, if you trust the Western Standard to provide you the straight goods, well, then you should support it, because the Western Standard refuses to accept a penny of the federal government's media bailout, and we can't do it without the support of you. Well, that's it for today. Nigel, Cory, thank you very much as usual.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
And all of you, thank you very much. Auf Wiedersehen.